Okay, good afternoon and welcome to all of you. I think we will slowly start. There are still some people finding their place, and we will also try to fix things with the camera. But good afternoon and welcome to all of you who came here today to the European Parliament, and also to those of you who follow the live stream online from all across Europe, from the higher education community. We are here today to discuss how universities and Europe can join forces for competitiveness and sustainable prosperity. And Laurence Farreng, member of the European Parliament from the Renew Europe group from France, and the European University Association have joined forces for this event, to organize this event here today. I'm Annalena Kleß-Kulik, and it's my pleasure to be your moderator today. We will discuss how universities can best contribute to Europe's competitiveness and sustainable prosperity, why this is actually important, not only for the economy, but also for society and for democracy. What are the challenges? What are the opportunities? And also how the EU can support universities and their partners in this. That's a big topic. It's an important topic. We only have until 2:30, so a bit less than 1.5 hours, because afterwards the room is booked again. But sometimes it's good to have just a short time, because that motivates us all to get to the essence right away. So we will start with some short welcome addresses from Laurence Farreng and EUA President Josep Maria Garrel. And afterwards, we will hear some key findings from the EUA report on universities and competitiveness. And then we will have a panel discussion with representatives from universities, the students, the industry, and also the EU institutions. There will be a short time in between for some questions from the audience that is here on site during the panel discussion. And for those online, we'll also hope to make it work that you can engage at least via an online poll that we are doing also. And at the end, we will also hear some perspective and closing words from EUA Secretary General Amanda Rawfoot. So that is what's on the menu for the next 75 minutes. And let's start right away with Laurence Farreng.
Dear President, thank you very much for your words. Dear President, ladies and gentlemen, it's really a pleasure to welcome you today in the European Parliament to raise the importance and the role of the universities and higher education. I will go into the detail, but in so many fields: competitiveness, soft power, and we know today in this geopolitical moment how important you are. Maybe I take 2 minutes to introduce myself. So I'm Laurence Farreng, as you said. I'm a French member of the European Parliament since 2019. And as a French member, I was elected in the movement of the President Emmanuel Macron. So we carry here everything that was in the discours de la Sorbonne, and particularly for me, this idea of alliances of European universities. So since the beginning, it's really an important goal for us. And as I am a member of the Committee for Culture and Education since 2019, I'm particularly involved in this field. So I'm shadow rapporteur for a new group on Erasmus Plus since this time. And I'm currently the rapporteur for the opinion we have on the Horizon program on every field related to higher education, culture, and so on. So let me address you a few words after this short introduction. Of course, at a time when we are experiencing extreme geopolitical uncertainty, the key words for the mandate is competitiveness, none for the sake of being competitive without purpose, but to regain on our European sovereignty, whether technological, commercial, food or military. I obviously agree this approach and support the EU competitiveness strategies and policies, but I think that the education dimension and the role of the higher education sector in this fight for competitiveness and sovereignty are far too often overlooked. Without investment in higher education capacity, we will not have the informed and skilled citizens we need to build this European sovereignty. As you clearly show in your report, in the coming years, universities will have to make choices by adapting and modernizing their curricula, finding new ways of retaining and attracting talents, perhaps placing greater emphasis on interdisciplinary, exploring new areas of innovation, and even embracing the new paradigm of dual-use research. We will discuss all of that during our event. Today's event comes at a pivotal moment as negotiations for the future multi-annual financial framework and related program are about to begin. We need insights from you, of course, from experts, to help us, lawmakers, to raise awareness and ensure the role of universities in the EU competitiveness policies. This is why the work of the EUA is so important, particularly your report on universities and competitiveness, which you will be presenting today, but also the work of the many stakeholders in the sector whom I see here today. So I'm looking forward to hearing from you. I will now give the floor to Mr. Joseph Garrel, President, Chair of the European University Association. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much, MEP Laurence Farreng, for hosting us, for hosting this event, for your kind words. Many of us feel that the European Parliament is currently where things happen, where the debate about the future of Europe is shaped, and universities are ready to be partners of this process. Universities want to be partners, and we honestly believe that Europe needs its universities when it comes to addressing the challenges we face. So thank you very much for welcoming us at the European Parliament. I also want to thank and to welcome to you all, those who are here and those who follow us on a stream. A special thanks to our panelists. We think that we will cover the topic from different perspectives, from different approaches, and this is an example of what we mean by including in our documents the following sentence that I'm going to read. We should bring together the stakeholders and sectors that make up the knowledge base of Europe and the policymakers that can create the framework conditions to further develop and leverage competitiveness, end quote. So thank you very much for your participation. I am normally asked to introduce the European University Association, what the UAE is, what we represent and what we do, but today this will be done by Thomas Johansson shortly after I finish talking. So thank you, Thomas, for that. Just let me mention that with almost 900 members, including universities and national rectors conference in 48 different European countries, we can say that our association is the voice of Europe's universities. We can also proudly say that Europe is a knowledge superpower. The European Union alone educates over 20 million students across one of the most interconnected higher education systems worldwide. And if we look to the European higher education area that goes beyond the European Union, universities and higher educations have more than 30 million students. But universities not only train the workforce and future leaders, universities generate fundamental knowledge. Universities are key players in order to enable innovation across sectors. And last but not least, universities nurture democratic societies and fit evidence-based policymaking. I think that we can all agree that Europe's universities are not just observers or instruments for the competitiveness agenda. Universities are a fundamental pillar for Europe's competitiveness agenda. In February 2021, we published our vision for 2030, one document whose title was a clear statement of intent: universities without walls. In our vision, included in that document, we highlight that universities are not isolated actors. Universities are open, are transformative, and transnational institutions. And universities combine their unique mix of missions: learning and teaching, research, and innovation. I think that from time to time, we need to repeat to ourselves and to the society we serve what universities are and what universities do. In line with this declaration of principles, 1 year ago, we published our policy position, our proposal, reacting to the competitiveness moment that Europe was living. To be honest, nothing new, at least for us, but worth repeating over and over again. The summary of our position was included in the title of the document: a research, education, and innovation partnership for Europe's competitiveness. Let me highlight only one word of this title: partnership. I hope you will agree with me that competitiveness of Europe depends on sustaining the entire knowledge cycle, from basic research to skills, innovation, and societal impact. And I also hope that everybody will agree that Europe cannot retain its strategic independence or its political and social model without having research, innovation, and education at its heart. This is not easy. This is in fact complex, but this is feasible. I'm going to quote one of the final sections of our policy position on competitiveness. Europe needs to invest, and Europe needs to create better framework conditions that allow the actors in research, in education, and innovation to adapt, to develop, and to grow, end quote. Obviously, this requires a continuous dialogue. It requires to be focused. And as I said before, universities are ready to take part in this process. I am not the one saying it. It is the UA, the European University Association, on behalf of the universities in our continent and after extensive consultations with our members, that say so. We propose a formal partnership for competitiveness for knowledge stakeholders and policymakers. And this is why we are happy to be here today discussing across sectors about the role and future of Europe's universities for competitiveness. I'm going to leave it here. I think that what I said is well known among the audience. The key issue is to raise awareness beyond these walls, beyond the institutions that we represent, to raise awareness about what we think is needed and about what we are keen to do. And if I may, raise awareness too of what is at stake if Europe does not find its way in the challenging moment that we are living. So let's do it together. Thank you very much.
Many thanks to both of you, Mrs. Farreng and President Garel, for your words. Now we will dive into the future, not through a crystal ball. That wouldn't be quite like what universities usually do. But we will hear about 3 different scenarios of possible futures that EUA has developed last year with a group of university leaders. And they built very much the core of the EUA report on universities and competitiveness that Thomas Jürgensen, Director for Policy Coordination and Foresight at EUA, will now present to us. Thomas, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. We, as Annalena said, went into this about a year ago to really see what are the possible futures. How can we do something that's new and creative about competitiveness? I'll just run through these slides. I hope they are as fun to listen to as they actually were to make. As Josep Maria said, here's a map. I think that's very telling about EUA and what it is. It's the Association of Europe's Universities, 948 countries. And our job in life is to facilitate the dialogue between all those members. It's very, very important for us. Of course, and this is what we do today, we represent the interests of our members. We make sure that our voice is heard, And we, of course, support our members with specific services. So this is what EUA is about. It's a fairly simple organization, actually, when it comes down to it. Just a recap of where we stand, which, of course, won't be new to the people in Brussels, but it's always good to start with the beginning. I think Madame Farreng said it, we're in an emergency. This is about Europe's security. This is about the European way of life that is at stake. And both the gentlemen on the pictures here, Letta and Draghi, had that as point of departure for their various reports. What is the answer? Engagement in deep reforms of the single market, deep reforms of capital, and having, as it was put, research and innovation at the heart. Where we are now is, of course, much more an implementing phase of this, where we see the focus priorities, that how we can increase investments and how we can make the market reforms. And for those in Brussels, this is sort of daily bread, and we see how this I think the expression is how this hits the road. But let's look further back, because we've been here before as universities. This is not something universities now wake up to the fact that they must serve society and competitiveness. If we go all the way back to the 90s, we had this discourse about research to revenue. There was the creative class, if people remember that, how well-educated people in the cities were driving the economy, and we had wonderful ironic music about the same things. And that, I think, lasted up until the 2010s, when we began to have sustainability. I have to say something that many universities were very happy about, having a broader frame that was not just research to revenue, but really could show the whole spectrum of the contribution to society through sustainability. And now we're turning into this drive to survive modus of competitiveness. Sustainable prosperity. We're, of course, very happy that the sustainability angle, that the broad angle of our contribution is there. But it is a much more tough world to live in. And I think that's clear also for the next slide. We have this feeling of precariousness, the volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous world. You could call it about polycrisis. This is sort of our daily context that really that we live in. Now, turn on the TV. This is what you see. But we thought we needed to go beyond that trends analysis and say, okay, here are the present trends. What happens in the future? Because you can't know. You need to have more futures in play. So we made 3 scenarios or 3 forecasts as conversation starters. So as Annalena correctly said, not as predictions, but as conversation starters. Where's this going? The all promises fulfilled scenario. What if Draghi and Letta are right and we manage to get done everything they say? An authoritarian turn. This is not in the scope of the impossible. And then a vision about something completely different, about fragmented society. But if we just go into the first one, Europe's resurrection a la Draghi. So also keeping in mind the political specificity of that report and of that vision. Maybe a little bit ironically put here, we will have massively investments in research and innovation, something that universities, of course, happy about, but also highly prioritized. I mean, that prioritization, Brussels word directionality goes through this. There will be enlightened people in Brussels, bureaucrats, politicians, that will give priorities for research, likely in defense, likely in green technologies. Europe will be a leader in this future. There will be demographic decline. We never managed to make a forecast without demographic decline. But there will be sort of targeted immigration policies. And then we have the climate crisis. Again, a thing we did not manage to make a forecast where there was not a climate crisis. So this is sort of the best of all worlds. At least a world where Europe is resurrected. It is also a world of a lot of top-down prioritization. Then we have the agony. We imagined a world of US hegemony, big tech controlling the world, at least controlling the Western world. Autocratic governments doesn't mean that universities disappear, but they must deliver solutions, and please, with no critical reflection. Demographic decline, this is something that we talked about to university leaders about this, something that they worried about. There's no immigration valve for the demographic decline. This is really a crisis in the closed down authoritarian and national conservative vision. Climate, of course, deteriorates completely. And academia finds itself in a place where it must protect itself, deliver the solutions, try to see what it can salvage. It supports the things they can, and then try to resist, maybe sort of a guerrilla academia. We see signals for all of these things today. And the last one is a fragmented forecast. What happens if the state withers? You could imagine this meltdown of the economy through a debt crisis, for instance. Governments are weak, but industry is also weak. We don't have big tech taking over here. People need to rely on their communities. And if you are lucky, you're in the community there on the right, and you manage to manage yourself. If you're unlucky, you are, of course, completely exposed to all the things that a fragmented society cannot manage. And we have here, we choose to illustrate that with the climate crisis. And academia here is for the lucky few. If you happen to be exposed to it, and you're lucky, but there's no inclusion, there's no massification of academic knowledge. So in the first, where maybe we're worried about instrumentalization and directionality, here's what happens if there's no directionality, if there's no big state, it becomes for the lucky few. We go to the end. So what are the challenges here? We're under pressure in all scenarios as universities. There was no sort of paradisiac solution. There's control and steering in the resurrection. There's full political instrumentalization in the autocratic vision. And then, of course, there's the collapse of the state in the third forecast. However, we did this in the project. We talked to university leaders about this, and Alina did a lot of interviews. And the last question of these interviews were, are you optimistic about the future? And they were all optimistic. From different points, they were all optimistic. They said, yes, we can do this. We agree with the narrative. We feel we can contribute. We are in good shape to contribute. We need to sharpen our profiles to where we are. So a sort of blanket, universities need to modernize to do this, this, and this. Universities need to innovate in this, and this way. It's difficult because all the ecosystems and all the contexts are different. So there was really a will to say, we contribute, but only we who stand in our ecosystem knows how to contribute the best way. And of course, on the basis of university values. Universities are not sort of machines for competences or for specific solutions. They're very good at doing this, but there are, of course, a number of university values that need to be taken into account. So I think those were the things that come out when we talk about the partnership for competitiveness between all the stakeholders that work for it in Europe. So with that, I want to say thank you for your attention. Here's the report if you want to read it. It was fun to write. I think it's fun to read. I'll give it back to Annalena and to the questions.
Yeah, thank you very much, Thomas, for taking us to the future, or at least to different possible futures. But we are right here now in March 2026. And before we start the panel discussion and hear from our panelists what they have to say, I would like to ask you here in the room, our audience, but also those online, to share with us, how do you feel about these futures when you listen to Thomas? We can, of course, always say this with a bit of a smile in our eyes and talk about these futures, but we see some of the signals already in the present, and they are, at least in my point of view, quite scary sometimes. So I invite you now to go to the Mentimeter that my colleague Lydia has prepared. You can either just scan the QR code you find here on the slide or go to menti.com and then use the code. And let's just sense into the first forecast, Europe's resurrection. Sounds great, doesn't it? Even if money, of course, is very much steered towards certain technologies, solutions. What about academic freedom? What about those subjects that are maybe, or disciplines that are maybe considered a bit less important in that area? In all these forecasts, there is often a kind of something that's slightly discomforting as well. So how do you feel about the first forecasts? You can just indicate it in 1 or 2 words, and we will hopefully get a nice word cloud here online. And now it would, of course, be great if I could see those 2, which is a bit challenging. Yeah, someone says or indicated worth fighting for, indeed, and insecure. Yeah. Something else. And yes, Lydia, if you could come here, that would be great because I really have difficulties to read it. Thank you. Okay, probably the less likely. Okay, so some of you is not very optimistic. At a cost for the already disadvantaged. Okay. It's too late. Well, that's what Draghi also almost says. It's not too late, but almost. Resilience. Yeah. Utopia. Okay. And there are many more of those, but let's go to the next forecast because we also want to afterwards hear, of course, what the panelists have to say. The second forecast. The autocratic turn. If I remember correctly, Thomas, we didn't call it like this in the first place, but given the signals over the past years since we developed those, you could probably call it like that. If you sense into that future, how do you feel about that? In it, okay, wow. Yeah, depending on where you are, in which country, which part of Europe or which part of the world, you probably feel that you're in that, yeah. A reality that has been in the making for years. Okay. Now I can't see it anymore on the, yeah, okay, it's here, yes. Unfortunate, but scarily close, or halfway there. So there is some nuance in here. No? You don't all believe that we're here, there yet. Luckily, probably. Unlikely to actually happen. So there is someone optimistic here. Okay. Let's go to the third forecast, the fragmented society. So here it depends very much where are you in that fragmented society? You're part of which group? Those who are more advantaged or those who are less advantaged? How do you feel about that? Again, someone says already happening. Yeah, that's interesting because when I thought about these forecasts again as well, I thought like, well, somehow these are all happening in parallel. Maybe already. Again, fighting against it, yeah. Someone says also it's quite probable or already reality. Very risky. A clear step back. Terrifying, okay. AI can level access, so someone sees an opportunity maybe to work against the negative consequences of that. Regressive, yeah. Okay, so this was just a snapshot. You can continue to indicate your answers. We will collect that afterwards. But yeah, as you could see already from Thomas's presentation as well, with all these fast developments, changes, and the uproar that we see in the world, we can, of course, get a little frightened and worried about that as well. But the important thing is that none of these scenarios are set in stone. They're not predictions. And in fact, the future is quite open. So let's discuss how we can shape that. So I would like to invite the panelists today that are with us here today for our discussion. We have Laurence Farreng, member of the Committee on Culture and Education of the European Parliament, whom you already heard. We have also Alexander Hopsa, cabinet expert from the cabinet of Stéphane Séjourné, European Commission Vice President for Prosperity and Industrial Strategy. And Alexander previously also had the role of chief economist in DG Research, so he very much is familiar with R&I policy. And then we have Marcin Pallis, to my left, former rector of the University of Warsaw and EWA vice president, very much also working on innovation policy, open access, and research careers. And then we have Claire Scantlebury, Director General from Europa Bio, the European Association of Bio-Industries, a sector that very much collaborates with universities. So she has a lot to share on that as well. And to my right, we have Lana Pa, President of the European Students' Union from Croatia, who happens to be also a graduate in bioengineering, right? That's what you said? Yeah, biotechnology. So we have something in common here in the panel. After having listened to Thomas's presentation and the reaction from the audience, I would just like to ask the panelists, how do you feel about these different futures, and what do you think we need to pay attention to when it comes to universities and competitiveness in the future? I would like to start with Lana, because we give the students, of course, the floor first.
Thank you very much. And thank you also once again for the invitation and organizing this event. And looking at the forecasts, looking at the possible scenarios, thinking about it. One thing that's very clear for me, from my perspective, is that Europe's greatest competitive advantage is its educated and engaged citizens. But nevertheless, talking about the competitiveness and the role of universities, we can see possible trade-offs that could happen in this regard. One important one is between responding quickly to labor market needs and preserving the broader mission of the universities. And students absolutely want relevant skills, but universities must also provide critical thinking, interdisciplinary knowledge, and civic education. Because if we focus only on short-term skills, we risk undermining the long-term adaptability that Europe's competitiveness actually depends on. Another trade-off could be concerns competitiveness and accessibility. Europe needs excellent universities to compete globally, but that excellence must remain accessible. If higher education becomes less affordable or less inclusive, we lose talent and we actually weaken Europe's social and economic resilience. There is also tension between the speed of innovation and the democratic governance that is characteristic for European universities. Universities are communities where students and staff participate in decision-making that can sometimes be slower, but it is also what protects academic freedom and also ensures responsible innovation. Of course, Europe rightly talks about strategic autonomy, especially in technology, but universities are also global institutions built on collaboration across borders. The challenge is finding a balance where Europe strengthens its capabilities without closing the openness that drives scientific progress. And finally, strong cooperation between universities and industry is essential for innovation, but we must also safeguard academic freedom and independent research. Universities should be partners for industry, not simply service providers.
Yeah, thank you very much, Lana. That was very clear. Universities, not simply service providers. Marcin, how do you see this? Do you agree with it?
Well, I think first it is important to say that the reactions we saw here were quite pessimistic, but universities could be the source of optimism in this debate. First of all, because they are already for a long time involved in discussing the third mission and the impact on the society. Then because they are different, they are in different ecosystems, in different regions, and they have different advantages. So taking advantage of this different situation that could provide different impetus for the competitiveness is important. And finally, because there are many topics, of course, we used to focus on the research and the technology transfer and the things like this as the main impact of the universities. But I would argue that it's the education for innovation that is as important, because this on the longer run allows to have the capacity for the innovation and for the competitiveness. So as those are important things, I would like to mention one trade-off, one of many, but that's one I chose to show here. We need the competitiveness with the world, with the outside world, but we also need the cooperation inside Europe and inside the academic world. So we have to look for the right balance between the cooperation that gives the scale and competitiveness, which is the source of the progress. So that would be.
Yeah, thank you very much. You outlined already some trade-offs as well. Claire, how do you see this from an industry perspective?
Thank you. Yes, and it's great that we have biotech in the room with two people, because of course it is the best of technologies. So I think the points that are made are really important, and I think Europe often sells itself a bit low in terms of the excellence of its baseline. You know, when you look at our skills capacity and the skills level within our employment layers, plus the ability to develop skills, Europe has an exceptional setup already, and it's exceptional compared to many other global regions already. One of the reasons why President Biden issued the original executive order for biotech and biomanufacturing was to address a massive skills deficit within the US, in that they literally couldn't set up new economic models of operation because there weren't the skills base there to do it. So I think Europe must definitely make sure that it retains and understands that this is a huge asset that it has. And I was also thinking very much about the resurrection element here. And it's not, for me, that really infers that it's resurrection to what it was before. And that's not possible. You don't turn back the clock. The world is not the same as it was 50 years ago. So it's where Europe wants to go next and aims towards that. Because not only do we have amazing innovators within the US, you also have amazing innovators with China, which is now a huge presence on the global market. It is not the same as it was 50 years ago. And biotechnology, we use that as an example all the time. It's Europe's perhaps strongest critical technology, and the one that it is most likely to be able to build very solid economic frameworks through, because it already has such a deep base. And we measure this every year through our Y4 report to show the economic footprint. But it must have somewhere to go. Universities do an amazing job. They do a lot of research, they do a lot of innovation out through universities, but they can't lift it all the way to market. The technologies must have somewhere to go. So the markets need to be open, they need to be accessible, and they need to be at scale. So that's one major part that sits alongside universities. And we always say, or I've always said since the beginning of my career, when we started out in the Cambridge Biotechnology Cluster in the UK, you don't have a product until somebody buys it. So it can be the best product in the world, but if nobody gives you money for it, you haven't solved anything. So it's really important that universities play their role in terms of enabling the maturation of technologies that can be rapidly progressed and matured and moved. And for that, there needs to be the other half of the equation in place as well. Public money can only go so far. If you have a lot of public money, it can almost create the sense of an artificial push in that it looks wonderful, it's getting bigger and bigger, but then as soon as the public money stops, everything stops. We need to measure success on its complete route to market, not just the point at which it exits universities.
Thank you very much, Claire. That was very clear. So you don't have a product until someone buys it, and universities are also, from your perspective, there to help maturing things and innovation before it goes to the market. Laurence, Farreng, from your perspective as a politician, how do you see this? What do we have to pay attention to when it comes to universities and competitiveness and the trade-offs that were already mentioned here?
I'm necessarily optimistic, I must. I think we need to go faster, indeed, but we have a really beautiful opportunities with the network of our universities. What we build today in only a few years, it's really wonderful. But I think we must, it's not well known enough. Even inside our bubble, I think it should be, it should have more visibility. And maybe I will look to you as no, but I think it's very important because as Stéphane Séjourné presented yesterday, on dit accélérateur industriel in English, alors tout le monde a compris l'acte sur l'accélération industrielle européenne that has been very warmly welcomed with the European preference and so on. We must now create the link between what you do in the academic world and what happens in our economy, how we have the real potential to develop, strengthen. We are innovative. You do wonderful things. But I think we have to accelerate the transfers with the economic world, really. Maybe you could tell a word about how you consider the research European area. I think it should be very interesting to consider that. How we implement as well, you talked a lot about the report, but we have the LETA reports with the fifth mobility of knowledge research. That is quite important. In our chance, we have the attractiveness of EU versus USA and what's happening in the world of research, of course. But if I may, the difficulty maybe we have as lawmakers, policymakers, is that, of course, we stand for your academic freedom. That is a key point in our European value. And in the same time, you want to invest strategic sector. So we should know, and maybe I've not the information and the answer, how you create this bridge between your curricula and the needs of our economies and sovereignty, policy of sovereignty. But once again, I'm very optimistic in the capacities of the EU, and particularly on what you are building together. So maybe I will be very interested if you could tell us a word about the link you create or you imagine between this sovereignty strategy and the world of academics and research. If I may, I give you the floor back, but I would be very keen on hearing from this.
You made the perfect transition. So let's ask Alexander Hofstadter. Could you tell us a little bit more indeed about the initiatives that the Commission, of course, already put on the table and the role universities play in there? What do you see maybe as trade-offs from your perspective?
Okay, thank you. First and foremost, thank you for the invitation. Now, I was more planning to speak as a former chief economist and also a member of the Draghi's team, but I'll try to widen the perspective. Just a couple of remarks on the scenarios. I mean, also being an optimistic person, I felt quite pessimistic when I saw them. Now, I think the first round of discussion with the panel has actually brought back my optimism, because then you immediately see how people work within these scenarios, and then try to kind of find the role for universities, how they can contribute to better outcomes than necessarily charted by these scenarios. And then this is in a way role of foresight to force you think and challenge your priors. So I think there, Thomas, you have succeeded. Although one could speak for hours about how plausible or implausible these scenarios are. I don't want to go in the direction. Just one small thing, which I think is also important for the discussion today. When we're talking about a positive outcome, so here you painted a resurrection scenario, which actually is based on top-down kind of setting of priorities, and then this is seen as the only way to succeed, which I would challenge. I think it's very clear that in the current world, and then here I'm going a bit in towards your question, we need to be maybe more directive. We need to set priorities. We need to use resources well. This is because the world is really becoming more geopolitical, and we have discussed the rise of China, the role of US. So in these settings, one needs to prioritize bit more. Now, I would argue, however, that in order to succeed in this, to become really an innovative bloc, being at the state of art, we also need the bottom up in order to identify the new trends, to come up with new ideas, and then this does it's almost excluded that this would come from the top-down setting of priorities. So eventually, to have a meaningful approach and succeed, one needs to combine both. And this is also something, and then here I'm coming to what the Commission is doing and planning. This is also what is behind the proposals that we have put forward. Just look at the proposal for the next MFF, which contain the blueprint of the European Competitiveness Fund, which would be closely interacting with Horizon Europe. So Horizon Europe traditionally has very strong bottom-up elements, and then these should be further strengthened in the future. Of course, depending on the outcome of negotiations with the Parliament, with member states. So clearly, the blue sky bottom-up approach is there, both as regards, for example, research, but also as regards more disruptive innovation type of activities. Just look at the European Innovation Council. It's open challenges and so on and so forth. So there is a strong bottom-up aspect. On the other hand, clearly, other parts of Horizon Europe, but also of the European Competitiveness Fund, are directed more towards specific priorities, trying to identify and find ways how the knowledge, innovations that have already been generated, how we can bring them better to the market. And then there we react to the analysis pointing to a number of weaknesses that we have in the system, where we have increasing number of startups which actually never make it to the scale-up phase because of regulatory issues, because of access to finance, well, maybe insufficient talent available, and so on and so forth. So these are all elements on which we need to act in order to make sure that this funnel, and was already mentioned, the life cycle of innovations and investment is in place. And then this is the philosophy behind the proposals that the Commission made recently.
Yeah, thank you very much for outlining this. Maybe a bit provocative. This all sounds great. So you also want bottom up and a bit of top down. And the universities, of course, want bottom up as well. So we don't even have an issue, do we, Marcin? What do you think? What's the right balance in this?
Well, it is quite clear from the discussions in the academic world that we need a balance between the systemic view on the competitiveness and the university institutional views on competitiveness. Because we can see the divergence of this big topic and big questions with the daily operation of the universities, with the problems with capacity, with funding, with regulatory overburdening of complicated legal frameworks, public support questions, and all the legal things. But there is also one important thing that we used to be focused on the technical innovation, and there is a huge area of social innovation, which is also very important, and it is governed by slightly different schemes and slightly different processes that bring this social innovation into the fruition. And what is also something that should be mentioned is that the competitiveness seen as only the economical progress or the social progress cannot be disconnected from European values and democracy. And this is also a part of the job that universities do, and they are trying to do it more to larger extent. And it's the competitiveness itself does not yet make the Europe attractive. It's the attractiveness as a whole, as a society, as a region, as values, and as the project for the future that makes it attractive. And I think that this altogether could be put into the question that we need, on one hand, resources. On second hand, we need the flexibility for universities to contribute in those places when it makes sense, because not everywhere it makes really sense. So it's good to have some freedom in discussing and negotiating or agreeing about where the universities can make the biggest impact and where pressing them to make the impact is to some extent wasting of time, money, effort, and opportunity.
Claire, maybe I would like to ask you something about what Marcin just said. Yes, universities can make a big contribution, but maybe we shouldn't press them to contribute to everything in competitiveness. What do you think about this from an industry perspective? Where are universities best placed as partners for you?
It's a super complicated question, obviously. And if you could take the two main ways in which universities engage in competitiveness. You've got one, let's say you've got the pathway where you've got a platform technology or a product that spins out into a company and grows from there. Two, you've got ongoing industry collaboration with academic researchers, often in the long term. And both of these scenarios are quite challenging for universities. As you said, they have a huge social responsibility. It's an integral part of regional development. And when growing up, I saw my own region transformed by the growth of the university. You know, if something happened to that university, it would be a catastrophe for the whole region. But at the same, so it brings costs, it brings slowness, it brings complexity. But at the same time, they are also expected to go, here is all of our spin out companies growing everything tomorrow. They are expected to set up productive collaborations with industry. And certainly what we know now is that industry, large companies in particular, are looking at higher TRL levels for engagement. They are looking for universities to come with more proof of concept before they will engage. And these place universities in a really almost impossible position because they cannot be all of these things to all of these people. However, at the same time, universities are often very slow in what they do. And so when you're looking at trying to set up a novel platform or a novel company, it's too slow. So it's how we enable, our universities the right vehicles to do some of the most complex, fast, technical, commercial activities, because they're simply not built to do that, and they're not receiving any money to do that. So I think there needs to be focus on how we can accelerate the interface without challenging the university too much, but also helping the universities to understand that there is an area that is less suitable for them to play in, but we need to work out what does play in that area. How do we set up the fastest companies that can grow the best? How do we combine complex technologies to make the new next generation platform for something? Because I mean, one university alone can be quite slow in how it does things. Two universities together trying to create a spin-out company is even slower. So how do we find this sweet spot in the middle that enables universities to continue contributing in the way that they do, but that technology that comes out feeds into a much more accelerated pathway into a commercial activity?
Thank you very much for this perspective, Lana. From a student perspective, when you talk about all this innovation and being close to market, how does that look from your perspective? Are you also thinking innovation in that way, or is there another sense to that?
Thank you. So I would say that when we talk about competitiveness and innovation in general, the main question is, how do we see it? How do we expect it? What do we want to be competitive in? Do we just want to focus on market, on tech excellence? Is that the way we want to go? Is that the end result that we want? Or is it also about keeping the values that we as Europe have? Is it about keeping the democratic values, keeping the social responsibility also, especially of and for higher education? When we look at the forecasts, the most positive one is also the one that has strong democracy that is still preserved. So I think that what's important from a student point of view is that we have clear stances on what we want from competitiveness. Yes, we want more investment. We want making also the pathways to research and innovation, bureaucratic procedures, innovation and investment in innovation for universities to make it easier. But at the same time, we don't want to step away from the values that we have. We don't want that on the cost of democratic values, on democratic processes in the universities. We don't want that to come as a cost of to cut off the social responsibility of the universities, also public responsibility of higher education. So I think that when we talk about this, when we talk about the future that we want, it's important to know that we want also to live in democratic society with respected values, in safe Europe, in inclusive Europe. So in that sense, if that means taking a step back, is looking at the broader picture and taking all of this into account, I would say that slow is the fastest way to go, because we can see examples on a global level what happens if those values are not taken into consideration. We have blueprint examples in the US and all around the world, what happens if democratic values, ethical values, and those perspectives are not taken into consideration when it comes to also science and innovation. So for sure, we don't want technocracy in Europe. We don't want these examples. We want all of us, and we see it also as the responsibility of policymakers, but of broader society, to look at those examples, to learn lessons from them, and to do it better. If that means doing it a bit slower, I would say that's the trade that we're ready for, because the end result and the society in which we want to live in, Europe in which we want to live in, I think it's worth of maybe doing it a bit slower, but keeping the values and keeping the also European way of life and the values that make Europe different and attractive, and I would argue also the most competitive right now at the global scale.
Thank you very much, Lana. So here was actually a pledge for being slower in a world that's getting, can't even get ahead of the speed of change anymore. And Laurence, Farreng, you said before we have to accelerate. So what do we do now? How do you make sure in the European Parliament to find the right balance?
No, but I think there's no opposition. We have to go faster by considering the price and the value of our universities of education. Of course, when it comes to the alliances, they are under the umbrella of the Erasmus Plus program, where it's very clearly written the respect of European values. And it's not hazard today if Hungary is not even part of Erasmus Plus. Of course, it's at the core of everything, but I repeat, we should go faster, absolutely, by financing the project, by making bridges between research and academic curricula and so on. And maybe just before leaving you, I'm sorry, because I have to go back to Paris, I would like to put another topic on the table. It's the international cooperation. I think it's quite an important point. As I would like to mention two points. First one is UK coming back in Erasmus Plus, and maybe we are today negotiating for youth European scheme for the mobility of students, and then it means new cooperation if we achieve to have lower tuition fees in the university, which is a big point. And the second one is the agreement with India, in which you have in the political side of the agreement a very important twinning program with university, engineer schools, and so on. So and maybe I will name another last one. It's in the strategy for Mediterranean that was a little bit controversial here, but in which I think there are so many important things when you see what is happening in the Middle West, for example. But I think this opening towards the world, the links we can build with other third countries is really key in our defense strategy, even in our sovereignty, because we have to strengthen this link in this dangerous world, I think. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And we, of course, understand you have to leave to get your train. Thank you very much for hosting us and also for your contribution. Thank you. Thank you. Claire, you wanted to say something.
I think there's a part from that I feel we didn't cover yet, and I completely agree. None of these things are exclusive. Going faster to create to mature a technology does not bring into risk any democratic values or anything like this. And I feel now that Europe has a moral imperative to move more quickly in some areas, particularly given the geopolitical situation. We have a moral imperative to work more within vaccine development. We have a moral imperative to move into those technology platforms that the US is moving out of. And we have a moral imperative to work more strongly with the global partners that we were just referencing here, because there's a gap there now. And Europe has, I feel, a very strong drive that we must go into those gaps, because nothing good comes from those gaps existing.
Alexander, did you want to react to that? Yeah.
No, I fully agree. I think the approach should be well rooted in our democracy and in our values, and this is clearly one part of responsibilities which universities have, and then basically social goods that they deliver to the society, and then we want to retain this. I think one needs to start on this basis. Now, when one looks around, I mean, and then this was already mentioned in the report initially, the world has become very uncertain and will remain so. I mean, we cannot really hope that we will come back to kind of frequency of crisis or size of crisis that we experienced some time ago, and we have to adjust to that. And I think this relates on the one hand to the economy as a whole. It of course relates to the society, and it has implications also for universities. I think at some point it was mentioned we need to have people well skilled and skilled in the way that helps them to basically have good livelihoods, to realize their ambitions, their dreams, but also to contribute to the society as a whole. And that's why one needs much more flexibility in the system, including in universities, in order to adjust their base, to adjust curricula, but also adjust the models as a whole to respond to this fast changing world. So I would also argue we should not go too slow in that direction. I would argue we need to do it properly, but we simply have to do it in order to be able to live in such an uncertain and very dynamic world.
Thank you very much. There's, of course, always the question about the framework conditions that universities need for that. But before we maybe address this briefly, I would like to open the floor to the audience in case someone of you has a question. We, I think, have time for one or two, because Amanda also should get some time for her closing afterwards. Does anyone have a question to our panelists? Yes, John, you rushed.
My question is two fantastic reports by esteemed economists last year, but one criticism I would have of both of them is that the neglect, what I would say, is the geographical political economy. So whether it's the fifth freedom, it doesn't just happen in a liberal ideal world. The world, Europe's not flat, it's spiky. And I don't mean the Alps and the Pyrenees, I mean the regions are different, and the way knowledge spreads is like the way the other freedoms spread, it doesn't spread equally. And I'd like that on competitiveness that you were involved with, one speaker at the Draghi report. It doesn't look at consent for the competitiveness. And a lot of these strategies that come from this place, in other words, in the end, don't work because people don't accept them, whether it's the constitution and for Europe, the Brexit referendum, and the increasingly division is not left or right, it's place. Its places don't agree with what's coming from the elite. So when it comes from universities, what I would like to know is, in the report, Thomas, is that the partnerships between universities and their places, so town gown, let's say relations, partnerships. What does it say about that? But also on the higher education system, should governments, and it's a provocative question, be doing more to actually geographically disperse knowledge to increase consent for the competitiveness agenda? One question.
Thank you very much, John, from Russia. That's a super important and challenging question. Does anyone of you want to say something about this? Alexander.
I'll give it a try. Basically, my views don't take this as any official position of the Commission, but clearly the geographical dimension is there. One could name also other reports going beyond Draghi and Letta, which were actually looking at the geographical dimension, and have also come up with proposals how to address this. Now, the trouble is that the innovation and knowledge tends to cluster in specific places. So I fully agree. Europe is spiky, and there is a natural tendency towards this spikiness. So one approach basically is, look, we've support these hubs. We generate as much wealth as possible, and then we redistribute. Some people argue seriously in this direction. I think it's not ideal, and certainly would leave a huge potential around Europe unexplored. So alternative way would be to really look at what potential different regions have to invest in specific sectors or technologies, and then try to nurture this. Again, there are different ways how to do this, and I could also share some reports which are providing some indications of this. But clearly, not every single region, not every single town, city will have a supercomputer, will specialize in AI, will specialize in hydrogen or whatever might be fashionable at a certain point in time. But I think every single region can actually develop specialization in something which has a future. And then there are ways how to identify this, and then there are ways how to steer development in this direction. Part of this, an important part of this is also cooperation. Since we're talking about exchanging ideas and whatever, what we see in Europe is that cooperation is also very much geographically constrained. Right? If you look at collaborations in terms of publications or patents, you see that a lot happens locally, which again is not such a surprise. When we have just discussed that innovation tends to cluster. You see a bit across regions, but you don't see much going across borders. So, which I think is a very important point, and then really shows to the underexploited potential of the single market for knowledge, the fifth freedom, and really points towards the need to identify ways how to make flow of knowledge much smoother. It's just if you compare with the US, we did a bit of data crunching. You see that the intensity of collaborations between Massachusetts and then California, so the two big hubs in the US, is some 30% higher than between France and Germany, like two big innovative economies in Europe. And then you can go further and whatever, but I think this is quite telling. So we really need to find ways how to make sure that the geographical borders are not also borders for the flow of knowledge, which normally people tend to think is flowing much more smoothly than goods, for example.
I think, thank you very much for giving me some time for my thoughts on this as well, because I completely agree. It's incredibly important that the knowledge-driven economy must be accessible and accepted by, and not just accepted, but recognized and engaged with by citizens everywhere, because we see the consequences when it's not. I have a Belgian passport as a direct consequence of this type of decision making, and I am very happy to be so. But having worked in the biotech sector for 30 years, I look across Europe and I've seen how it's grown economically, because every single country has a biotech sector. It often it's not recognized because it's hidden inside a technology or an industry. But we see every single country has a different flavor, and it's based on their existing industrial profile, their research base, and their skills base. So we see, there are industries in Portugal that are modernizing through biotechnology. There are industries in Hungary that are modernizing through biotech, and they're completely different. But they start because they've already got people in those sectors growing up as it modernizes. And that's why it's such the bioeconomy is so excellent, because every country can have its own bioeconomy based on its strengths, based on its needs. And what I find particularly great is not just the university conversation, but also all levels of skills required. Some of our large pharmaceutical company members are retraining hairdressers, food technologists into high-level clean room technologies, because they already have a base set of skills that can be brought. So for me, it's not only the geographical, I've lost the word now, the sort of geographical uniqueness that helps different types of industry grow, but also the requirement for multiple layers of skill development. So it's not just a university and a graduate discussion, but a school leaver discussion as well. So for me, those are all absolutely integral.
Yeah, thank you very much. Marcin, you also wanted to add
very short aspect. There are different needs for different competitiveness, and there is a question also of infrastructures, especially big infrastructures in the key technology areas. And this is sometimes something that is not really on the radar, how these infrastructures are spread, where they appear, and how do they impact this geographic spreading of competitiveness.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'm looking at the time. I know we could go on, especially on this whole regional innovation question, which is quite interesting. But I would like to give one last word to Lana, to the students. What is one thought you would still like to share with the audience before we come to the closing?
Yeah, thank you very much. And thank you, John, for the question. And I think that just briefly to reflect on that, I think it's also important to keep in mind that when we talk about competitiveness, we need to talk about and think about general, broader competitiveness, not just the one that will be centralized. So to have fully and strong Europe, we have to think about all of Europe, different parts, especially the ones who need the most support and the most development. And overall, in general, I think that we can all agree that strong universities are not just service providers for the economy. As the outcome of this discussion, they are institutions that generate knowledge, innovation, and democratic resilience, all of which are essential for Europe's competitiveness. And I think that after discussions, we came to the same conclusion that thinking about these aspects is not making us slower. So I think that also from students' perspective, we're hoping to see the equal amount of enthusiasm in tackling those different perspectives, equal amount of enthusiasm, and also agency and investment into these areas. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this. Thank you very much to all the panelists for your thoughts and your different perspectives. Universities are not just service providers to the competitiveness debate, indeed. And Claire, you shared this in the pre-discussion. I think you said universities are the motor, but not the whole engine. They also have the partners. So we have to create the right framework conditions for that, that we can all work together. Thank you very much for the discussion. I'm handing over to Amanda Crawford, EUA Secretary General, for the closing words.
Thank you very much, Annalena. I was asked in closing this event today to maybe kind of reflect on one sort of key takeaway message. I think that's really difficult given the breadth and depth of what we've actually talked about in a very short time this afternoon. But I think if I had to pick one thing, it would be this sense that, you know, even though we all recognize the difficult times we live in and the pessimism of some of the futures and the threats that we face, there is a real sense of kind of optimism and a sense that the universities and its partners can do something about this. And so I think I've been really cheered by some of the constructive ideas and suggestions that have come through this afternoon. I think it's really important that this doesn't just be, you know, this isn't just things that we discuss in the context of these kind of policy discussions, that it translates into kind of real action, and we go out and try to actually, you know, to sort of make the kind of future that we want and that will benefit society. And I think the other thing I would say is it's really clear that, you know, while we're talking about universities today, and obviously I'm representing the universities and we know the importance of the role of universities, we can't do anything by ourselves. Universities are part of a huge ecosystem where we need to kind of work with partners, where we need to work with policymakers. And I think this really kind of reflects what EUA said in its vision, Universities Without Walls, several years ago, that universities are not ivory towers, they're part of something bigger. So I think many of the things we touched on today sort of really resonate with that. From an EUA perspective, I would say that we absolutely commit to keeping working on these topics, keeping working with all of you, keeping up with our efforts to connect universities with policymakers and with society. We have a number of activities, priorities and activities at the moment within EUA that relate to the kind of topics we've been talking about today. So one thing I would like to mention is that we've just launched a new project within EUA on universities and democracy in times of polarisation. So this is bringing together experts from universities around Europe to really reflect on universities' role in terms of democracy and to come up with some actual practical ways of thinking in terms of what universities can do in protecting democracy and working on this topic. So that's only just started at the moment, so we will see some results from that in due course. But I think we really recognise the importance of talking about this topic at this moment in time. Then, of course, we will continue our work trying to help shape the future of the next wave of European programmes, the European Competitiveness Fund, FP10, Erasmus+, to make sure these are programmes that work not just for universities, but for everybody and society as a whole, and that we all get the best value from them. And also keep up with our efforts around academic freedom and university autonomy, which are big parts of our portfolio. So I will just finish there. I will stop there and finish by saying I just want to thank everybody involved in today. I'd particularly like to thank Laurence Farreng and all of her staff for hosting us and so we could do this. I'd like to thank all of the speakers who have joined us today, Anna-Lena for moderating, my colleagues in the Secretariat, particularly Lilia and Thomas, that made it happen. And then finally, everybody who's joined us for the discussions today, both in the room here and also online. So I think that's exactly 2:30, and so I will stop. Thank you all very, very much. Thanks.